Okay, so this is demo for lidded pots. First part being the throwing portion. So depending on the size of your pot, will depend on how much clay you use here. This part is just basically throwing a cylinder, except that we're going to have one added portion, which is making a galley. So, I grabbed all of my tools except a small sponge, which is the first one I need. See my hands pretty well? Okay, so center the clay. Cone it up. Push it back down. Scrape away some of that. It's giving me grief. Okay, so call that good. Now for making the entry, I want to go have plenty of water here. You can use this hand or you can use this hand. I like to push the thumb down in the center. Until you've got a clear divot with an obvious central point. And all of this is still centered. Get plenty of water in there, and then still feeling where the center is. Um, start putting your finger down into the center. Now remember, this is going to be a cylinder, so after your entry, which is this part I just finished, we're going to make an opening, and that means pull towards yourself. Keep, you use, this is about the only time that's okay to have a puddle of water in there, because the water runs out quickly. And you're going to pull towards yourself, make the full opening. So that was entry and opening, with a nice flat bottom to the pot, leaving enough thickness but not too much. I leave about a 1/2 inch down there because I like a good substantial foot. You never want less than 3/8 of an inch. 1/2 inch is really probably about right. Some people leave as little as 1/4 of an inch, and that leads to smaller feet and smaller pots. You can always trim it down if you don't like the large foot on there. You can't add clay. Okay, so now we're going to start pulling. I push in at the bottom here. I use the sponge. I want to keep enough water there, and even with the sponge it's drying out. So I pull up, that pull also went out quite a bit, so I'm going to bring it in with my next couple of pulls. I want to leave the rim fairly thick because this is the new element we're going to do, so we're going to split the rim. So I don't want to get the rim too thin, so that's one way to bring it in. The other is to just, what I was doing before, and do a pull and have it come in. Got a serious wobble in this now. As I brought that in, it started a little bit of a wobble. So good compression on the rim will help get rid of some of that. And then for the rest of it, I'm just going to I'm going to cut the top off. So I'm thinning this a little bit, trying to pull it nice and consistently. So that when I cut it off, I don't lose any more clay than I need to. Except I went way too thin over here. So I'm going to have to lose a lot of clay. The way you cut the rim off is you go below the lowest point of problem, and you just cut into it and cut it off, and that fell on it, and so it messed up that rim too. So at this point, I'm even going to have to cut some more off. Which, having to do that as a teacher is a little embarrassing, but it'll show you how to deal with it when it happens to you, so it's not that horrible. Okay, so Bring this in a little bit. That's still enough I can split the rim. Still thick enough I can split it without any real trouble. So I go down here. I'm too thick down in this area. So I'm going to grab some of that and start pulling that up. Okay, so you can see on these last couple of pulls I'm also stretching out a little bit of a belly and just trying to even this out, make it more consistent, get rid of that wobble that I just recreated. Whenever possible, brace your hands together so that they can be as steady as possible. Okay, I'm fairly happy with this shape. I think I'm going to bring it in just a touch on the rim and throughout here. Got that belly pretty much where I want it. Still getting some of that up and down, which I'm not entirely sure why I'm getting that. Again, notice compressing the rim, it's important to get it from three sides, whether you are wrapping it with your sponge like that or using your fingers, two pinching and one pressing down. Make sure you get it from all three sides as you compress. Okay, so now comes the new part. All of that's just pretty much cylinder stuff. This next bit, you're going to split the rim. Now, the easiest tool to use is your potter's knife if it's nice and sharp. If you've got a crappy potter's knife, you can go get a sharper one. You can also use your wooden rib or even your metal rib if you do it right. Your needle tool, I suppose, would work as well. But what you want to do is you want to find the center of the rib and, just like it says, split it. Now I've got an inner rim and an outer rim. I'm going to go and I'm going to flip this around, use this part of the tool to start to stretch that wide and kind of lay it down. This is creating the galley or the lid seat. This is where the lid is going to sit and rest. Galley or gallery is what they're officially called, but this is where we're going to get the lid to rest as it goes. Now I've spread it, got more than I want of that. So I'm going to take my needle tool. It's gone wider than I want it to go. I don't need quite that much. So I'm going to cut that off. Okay, so you can see there's distinctive flat area where the lid is going to rest, and I did that by splitting the rim. Now, this isn't the most beautiful and amazing. This part of the rim is a little thin for my tastes, and it was wobbling a little bit, so it's kind of thinner. It's thinner on one side and thicker on the other, and so I'm going to go and just kind of thicken it. I'm also, the way the lid's going to fit in, sometimes you'll put the lid in there, and then if this folds in just a little bit, it'll lock the lid in by folding over onto it. And so to try and prevent it from doing that, I'm going to have it be at a slight angle as it goes out. Other than that, it's pretty much time.
Sienna Tom, come to the office, please. Sienna Tom.
It's pretty much time to cut off the wheel head at this stage. I'm gonna clean up on the inside here a little bit. Clean up down here a little. Okay, so the foot is going to be just normal on this. Nothing particularly interesting about how we do the cylinder or the foot. The rim we treat differently, and then before you cut it off, it doesn't necessarily have to be before you cut it off, but it's a little easier if you do it. Then you're going to go and take this type of caliper, works. It gets both measurements at once. You're going to go and put this inside of there, spread it until it just barely fits inside of the galley. I just dinged it on that side because I don't have terribly steady hands, but I've got about the right measurement here, maybe just a touch narrower, and that will be, I'll use this side, which this measurement and this measurement are the same. Here and here are the same measurement. And then this will be the outside of my lid when I make my lid, and have that be the outside of the little lid shape I make. So, get my wire tool, which I also don't have. I created a little grip, and then I'm going to clean and dry my hands. Okay, so I'm going to clean and dry my hands, then get the wheel going. It's important that I push downward and keep this tight, stretch tight, and push down against the wheel head as I go across. Other than that, there's not a lot you can do to mess that part up. If you let it go closer together, or if you pull upward and don't keep it down, then it can cut off part of the bottom. And then you just pick it up down here and set it on the bat. If it goes a little bit out of circular gets a little bit off, you just fix that by tapping the opposite direction. This one didn't warp at all, so no worries. Okay, then I want to make the lid. I wedged up all of the clay together, and then I'm making the lid out of the same piece of clay. And I made enough clay for 2 different lids, both out of the same wedging, so that the clay is consistent and even, and it's all the same hardness. It's been wedged together, so there's going to be no surprises in the shrinking. So that's how you get a good lid fit. Now this first one I'm going to show you is what I call a dome lid. I'm going to show you the 2 lids that go on the internal knob, on the internal galley, where the galley is part of the pot, and the lids rest on the galley. So this small of a piece of clay. You can throw these lids off the hump or separately. Off the hump means you put a large chunk of clay on there and just use the top little bit of it to throw with. Or you can do it like this. I'm demoing this way because I figure this is how most of you will do it. I prefer to do it off the hump just because I don't like centering small amounts of clay. But anyway, so get in here. Well, I'll do it with this hand this time so you can see. I'm making that divot, which is nice and centered. As I get down into the bottom of it, I can push my thumb down a ways, but then I run out of thumb to go down any further, so I finish going down. Now this one is basically a bowl. That's what we're making. And so I'm not going to make a full opening before I start pulling. As I pull, it makes a curved bottom, and this is going to be the lid. Compress your rim, pull it out. Now, this is the point I should start checking right at this point. Okay, so this is already too wide. Probably more clay than I needed to. We'll just make this a really tall, lid. So I'm going to stand this back up a little bit, thin this out. I want there to be enough thickness in the rim of this bowl so that I can make I can do a little bit of trimming to make it fit, and I won't get it too thin and delicate, and I want it nice and rounded as much as possible, so that there's no sharp edges. But I do want this to be fairly flat where it rests on that galley. I want there to be a fair amount of surface area, but just with rounded edges. Okay, now I check my measurement. That's just about perfect, which means in order to make it, I'm going to widen it just a touch, stretch that out just a little bit, because I want it to be too tight, and then trim it to fit. Right now it's clearly too tight. I can't get that quite around it. So now it's going to be good. Should be just fine. I've left quite a bit of clay down here, a lot of thickness. That is going to be where I'm going to make what I'm going to use to make my knob. If I want my knob to be hollow, I simply take my finger in the bottom here and push down, and now I've got a hollow space for my knob. Don't go all the way to the wheel head, obviously, or you'll have more than a hollow knob. You'll have a hole in the end of your knob. Then I'm going to get It's got quite a lot of slip on here. In order to keep it from softening up too much, I'm going to rib off the slip. And there's lid number 1. Right before I cut it off, I'm going to double check, make sure, yep, still just about 1/8 of an inch too tight, which is just perfect in order to trim to fit. If you get really good at this, you can make them so that they just fit, but a little bit too tight is something that anybody can fix, and a little bit too loose is something that almost nobody can fix, and it really sucks to have it too tight. So notice I cut it off the same way I cut off everything else, and I'm also going to go and clean my hands. This time I'm just going to wipe them all over the apron, because I can, and thank you, but I'm going to put it on the same bat. I am going to put this lid on the same bat as I put the other one. I should have scraped a little bit away there. Notice how that got all oval shaped when I picked it up. As I put it back down, I'm just going to press on the opposite sides. Let's get it tipped so you can see. So I just went and I pressed on these sides, opposite of where I was holding, in a place I know I'm going to trim, and problem solved. It's now nice and round. Okay, the other one I'm going to make, is that about right? It also goes on the internal galley, but this one, instead of doming up, it's going to go flat and go down. So it's kind of like an inverted bowl instead of a regular bowl. But the knob goes on what would be the inside of the bowl in this case. Oops. Took a chunk off with my thumb. This is, again, a smaller amount of clay than I like to even try and center, just because my hands feel like they're getting in each other's way. But with this one, I'm going to keep it quite narrow down at the base, and instead of pulling down straight in the center, I'm going to create my knob. I don't know if this is how everybody does it, but it's how I'm doing it, and it's one way that works. Now this is a solid knob. If I wanted to make the knob hollow, which if it's going to be any bigger, if it's going to be bigger or round than this, that just sounds really weird, but I think it's correct. If it's going to be any bigger than this, you want to have it hollow. So let's say we're going to do a fatter knob, a nice short fat one. Then what we do is you actually make your little entry inside of there, get the knob, and the knob can go hollow all the way. You can go all the way down to the wheel head on the inside of the knob, in order to get it. And then what you do is you pull this up and in and squeeze it in, shape it until you've closed it off entirely, and then you push down there, even that out, and there we've got a hollow knob. And when I cut it off, that air pocket that's in there will be vented out the bottom. Okay, then we take this second part and we're going to pull this up and out. The difference is this is like an inverted bowl with a galley. Oh, and I just nicked that badly. It's kind of wobbling all over the place too, so see what I can do about that. Kind of play with this a little bit, and if I can get the wobble to be all this way, then I just take my needle tool cut it, slice it, peel it off, and it'll go with that other pile of stuff that I've had to cut off today. Obviously, there's still some wobble in there. Would not have been a bad idea for me to redo this. Okay, so we're going to get this out again. Calipers, which are still at the same measurement, and we're already too wide for that. So, being that we're too wide, I'm going to go ahead and just use my needle tool again. Cut it, slice it, peel it, pile it. And then check. Okay, it's just about perfect, which means I'm going to go and I'm going to stretch this out to be just a little bit thicker, which means tighter. I'm checking my galley, and I want this to be at the same angle as my galley was, and then I'm going to round the bottom of that off to match this shape. Later I'm going to flip it over, and I'll actually use the pot itself as a trimming chuck for this, and it works fairly well, although it sometimes gets caught up in the galley. So now it's just a matter of how does this lid knob feel, and I'm going to shape that just a little bit so that it's got a nicer, fits my fingers just a little bit better. And also, again, you want to enlarge this space just slightly, because as it shrinks, you don't want it to be cramped on your fat fingers, or my fat fingers. And then you can do whatever you want to this knob. Throw a purposeful spiral in it, except that just did not work. Should probably stop the video before I did that, because that was ugly. So that looks interesting, that little spiral, and I can probably live with that. So there we go. That's lid number 2 for the same pot. And what that means is one of these lids is not going to be used, but I would rather have 2 lids, and if they both make it all the way through the full firing process, then when I can stick one in the cupboard somewhere, and the other one will be a backup for when one of my kids is pulling the lid off and drops it and breaks it, or if I do, or whatever. Otherwise, I throw away whichever one sucks halfway through the process, either because it doesn't fit right, or because I trimmed through it, or I over trimmed, or I just don't like it. And so, same thing goes. I'm just going to focus on cleaning the 2 fingers I'm going to use because I'm running out of clean apron. Pick it up, set it down over here, and then putting all 3 of these, oh gosh. I just jabbed the side of my pot with my thumb, so that'll be fun to fix. I'm putting all 3 of these, all 3 of those on the same bat, so that they're all drying at the same rate, which being that they're different thicknesses, they're going to dry a little bit different rates anyway. But I want to make it as close as possible so that they'll shrink evenly.